Hi, and welcome to Koru Education, the podcast. We're delighted to have you along again. And today we are very, very privileged indeed. We've got Sophie Moss with us today, who is founder and CEO of Bridge and Bloom Education 5.0, which is a consultancy organization helping schools design emotionally intelligent and future-ready learning systems. Some big buzzwords in there, absolutely, but Sophie looks to try and turn those into a reality, which is really what counts. Sophie's got over a decade of experience teaching and leading UK primary schools, particularly an MSc in Education Leadership and Management. And she now works independently, creating things like tools like the Behaviour Navigator, which sort of reflects that deep commitment to bringing innovation to practical classroom realities. And hopefully that's what we're going to really talk about today. Her mission in our work is to create sustainable change throughout continual review and data trend spotting. And I think that really focuses on getting the data down to classroom level and making sure that the work we do remains emotionally intelligent and future ready, and perhaps pushes back occasionally against some of the developments that you might see that don't focus on those things. So, Sophie, welcome to the podcast. Delighted to have you here.
Oh, I'm excited to be here. Thank you, Chris.
Okay, well, let's make a start. A lot of your work is data centric. It's focused on making sure that data works, and I share that perspective in some of the work that I've done too. But that's not a universal perception that data is important, useful, or helpful. In fact, in some quarters, it might be even seen as a little bit of a hindrance, something that gets in the way, perhaps. Can you tell me, why is school data so important to you?
Well, I think when we talk about data, right, we tend to think of it where we've used it as a tool for accountability and compliance. And I feel that that was actually a misuse of data. So when I talk about data, I'm talking about the academic data, obviously, which is, the formative, the assessments and the benchmarking, but it's also the emotional data. Okay, so it's a combination of both. And for teachers to know exactly what is happening at that time in order to be able to support their students, I think that is very important. And what tends to happen with data, I think, from the senior leadership all the way down to the teachers, is the perspective. So when we are senior leadership, I believe we have a different perception, of what is clear in a narrative. And teachers need to actually understand the patterns, and they need to understand the narrative in the data. And what's most important to teachers is, how can I use it, and how can I use it now? So it needs to be immediate, it needs to be at that time, and it needs to be meaningful for them in order to help and support the children.
Yeah.
So I'm talking also with regard to emotional intelligence, the data that we can get from that, so which is the behavioral cues that children have, or the cultural and social factors that we need to also be aware of, because we need to know, aside from what they're capable of doing at that moment, we also need to know what are the other barriers, possible barriers, or other things that the children are coping with that might hinder them from actually learning on that day or at that time. So, yeah.
That's interesting. You talked a lot about that sort of emotional well-being in your reply there. I'm kind of curious as to how we measure that, because that's one of those things that can come and go, ebb and flow, hour by hour, if not minute by minute, within a school, be that for the teachers or for the pupils. And I'm kind of curious as to how you monitor and maintain that data, other than just a sort of teacher interaction, if you like.
I think one of the ways that you can measure that is with respect to pupil engagement, for one. So you have like a benchmark initially, and then once you're applying the particular strategies, then you can see a change in that engagement. You can see the change in the classroom environment, so it automatically will become calmer. It'll show a bit more critical thinking from the perspective of children, from their interaction. You'll be able to hear it in the oracy skills as well. and you'll see a more productive environment where children are supporting each other as well, and
Mm-hmm.
they're just more engaged because
Mm-hmm.
obviously the emotional side is being supported. So, for example, when a teacher sees that things are bubbling, or there's behavior that's bubbling, or whatever, then it's for that teacher at that time with particular strategies to actually support what's going on and helping those students navigate that situation. So
Mm-hmm.
you can see it with improved classroom environments. You can see it with improved engagement. You
Mm-hmm.
can also see it with improved staff satisfaction as well, because obviously
Mm-hmm.
that's part of it, the teachers. So you can actually quantify that as long as you do a diagnostic prior to that. And
Mm-hmm.
when you're actually putting in those strategies, you can actually see it translating into social outcomes for students as well as academic outcomes. So you have both that you
Mm-hmm.
can monitor that with.
Yeah, it's really interesting as well. You talked about real-time data in classrooms. Do you want to just explain to us a little bit about what you mean by real-time data, and then we can get into why it's so critical and how you actually get it?
So when I talk about real-time data, and it's also with the perspective of a teacher, because obviously I've been a teacher for years, it's a fact of sometimes as teachers we get a lot of data given to us, okay, and it's the abilities, it's where the student is, and it's projected, and you have a whole scope of what that data means.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, it doesn't actually help at that time in that lesson. So, for example, you need to actually have an evaluation of the student's ability at that time, because we need to be able to address it within that day of learning. Because the minute you leave it to later, there's no point. So even if we're talking about a very robust intervention plan and things like that, which are coping with later than that situation has happened, we know from data that's out there that the impact is very minimal. We know that, if none at all or not non-existent, because we also have to take into account the cognitive overload that children are coping with, the other 101, okay, a bit of hyperbole here, but 101 roles that teachers have, okay,
Mm.
in that in the classroom. So, for example, I can give you an example of a particular app or whatever, and I'm not sponsoring it or anything, but it's called Magma Maths, right? But it was just brilliant because it blew us away. Because that app not only showed the teacher the approach of the students as and when they were doing it, so you could tackle it then and there. You could actually access individual students as they were answering.
Mm-hmm.
And then the app itself required their working out. So they couldn't just give the answer and have the working out. And while you're in the lesson, you can have a pie chart or you can have a grid that's telling you exactly how the whole class is progressing. What are the misconceptions? Is it a whole class misconception? Is it not? So then the teacher knows, oh, I need to stop the lesson now. I need to engage with this. Now, that's the type of teaching that we need, which addresses it at that time when the children are engaged in the discovery and the exploration at that time. Because
Yeah.
we need to get them to engage with it again with the same passion. And for teachers, when we have that feedback, it just gets student-led and it just goes at really a fast pace.
Mm-hmm.
And we need that type of feedback to give to teachers, not to just say, oh, you need to keep an eye on your students, see what they are, tell me what you think, where are they, why do you think? It's a bit subjective. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it creates a lot of pressure for the teacher, because then the teacher's coming up against their perception against hard data. And there's there's quite a gap between the two.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think teachers become reticent towards wanting to even dive deeper into data, because it doesn't seem to be purposeful for them and they can't see it in the children and in the progress.
That's interesting, and I've come up against that argument several times before, where the teacher quite rightfully says, I know my kids, but then the next part of that is, I don't need a spreadsheet for me to know my kids. And I think there's possibly some merit in that. So how would you suggest a teacher maybe listening to this would react to a bit of data that perhaps goes against their perception of a child's ability or emotional position, that kind of thing? How would you recommend a teacher sort of deals with something where the data and their perception don't fit?
Well, I think it depends on the exact data that teachers are being given. So for one, it's identifying a pattern, and teachers are very good with identifying pattern. So it's not asking teachers to be an analyst, okay? So that's not the point of it. The point is just for teachers to be shown how to retrieve the relevant narrative from the data. And as long as we keep in mind that it has to be quick, it can't take up too much of time because there's a lot to be done with it. So once teachers understand, okay, plus I'm in a culture that I have psychological safety, that's going to allow me to make mistakes, okay, because, until I get this under my wing kind of thing. And once they have that, and it's a culture of curiosity, okay, then the teachers know, okay, I've got to understand this data. Maybe initially it's taking me a bit longer, but as long as it's given to them in bite size, that this is what is relevant to you. So in other words, we're looking at this data to show you that in class, these are the gaps that have been identified, and we are going to show this to you hour by hour, how you can then take this data just by a click on your screen. It's on the dashboard, you're seeing it, you're seeing where Jimmy is or where so-and-so is, and you can see exactly what then the teacher with the experience knows, okay, I know what I need to do with that. But they need the access, and this is where I think we kind of miss it a little bit when we're giving data to teachers, is that we give them the data that we as senior leaders need, with the spreadsheets and everything, that we love our pie charts and that's all we need actually at the end of the day. But a teacher doesn't need all of that. A teacher just needs, what do I do with this? Okay, so I can see it, and they're very action-based actually teachers. They're very much, I'm going to do it now. It's more like having to stop them rather than set them free. So as a teacher myself as well, and having loads of colleagues, that when we used to look at data, our heart just used to sink, because we think, what am I going to do with this? Because already termly, we get these meetings, which are standard meetings, aren't they? The standards, and you're supposed to see how you're going to project the next term. And you sit and you have the conversations and you say everything as a teacher. You say where so-and-so is, where you think they are, what they need in order to progress. But you don't get there because it depends on so many operational constraints that schools have. So teachers have got used to that. They've got used to saying what needs to happen. Schools agreeing, your line manager agreeing, yes, definitely, we're going to do that. Here is the plan. We're going to put in the interventions. Here's the capacity. But unfortunately, as we know with schools, the time comes and then it doesn't actually flow in that direction. And I think that's why teachers look at data and think, what's meaning? Is it going to be purposeful, or is it just going to be something that fizzles out as the term's gone?
I wonder if maybe there's an argument here that says that the data agenda or the data landscape within a school should be set from the ground up rather than the sort of top down, as it were. We seek out what teachers want to help them, rather than saying, here's some data, see how you can make it work in your setting.
Oh, that's lovely, Chris. That's absolutely something that I've been thinking about as well, because I think that going into this AI era, okay, it's not that AI is, the bad influence here. It's actually a good thing. However, going into 5.0 education, I feel, right, like you're saying, from down, up, it's actually sitting with teachers and understanding what type of data they want. And I think that this is going to be true throughout, where teachers will say, not just numbers, it's not just academic. We need to know the other aspect of it, and not as an SEN strategy, because we know how to do an SEN strategy. We know how to give that support to the SEND side of things. It's not that. It's the case of, I need to know at my fingertips what is happening, not after I see that one of my students is presenting with a particular pattern. So I need to now investigate what that pattern is. But I've lost that student now for half the day, because I can only have a particular time to go and investigate it or to feed it back. So even the information that the teacher is getting is delayed. So it's very frustrating, and it's frustrating for the teacher, and it's frustrating for the student. So I think definitely when schools eventually listen, that we need to give everything. We need to understand all of it, and we need to be preemptive and proactive as a school. We shouldn't be firefighting anymore. We shouldn't be putting band-aids anymore. We have enough experience to know I feel anyway, that what we can, the strategy and the operational plan we can put in place in order to get this information prior to. And I think then teachers will be happy with the result, because they know everything. You know, because even nowadays, I don't know if you found that as well. Attendance is very important. You know, attendance is deep, is very foundational in many aspects in a school environment. But as teachers, and it might not be in all schools, but I think in majority of schools, it tends to be information that is held at a particular level,
Yeah.
attendance. You know, so and teachers are given it more from the perspective of have a conversation at the end of the day and find out what's happening, but not as a case of attendance needs to be 100%, you know, not the 96 or whatever, which we understand because we've got our statutory requirements. However, we need to know, why isn't our student there every day? Why is that the case? Why is it not the case? What do we do, and how can we get that answer straight away? You know, can we get it straight away, and can we not delay? So then parents know as well that we engage with it, that the students know it's collaborative, it's responsive, you know, and it's reciprocal. So that'll be the way forward.
Do you think there's a risk in schools, and I've encountered this too, whereby data is a little locked up by the data lead? They don't want it corrupted. They don't want it shared inappropriately. They're very keen to be GDPR compliant and all of those things. So the willingness to open up the data cabinet for teachers to use because of the risks associated with that, there's a certain reluctance perhaps on the part of schools to do that. And I wonder if there's perhaps a feedback cycle whereby there's a reluctance to share information that they don't have to with teachers, and therefore teachers only do what they have to do in order to meet the requirements of SLT, and you end up in a feedback loop where teachers don't really engage with the wider agenda and get a chance to use the data in a way that would really suit them.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that, because I'll tell you an incident that happened actually. So I was a maths lead in whatever school, and so I was doing this mock Ofsted thing, and I was busy thinking that I was ready, and the one question I was not ready for was, what is your data? Because I didn't have it. So imagining being responsible for co-strand, but still yet not being, you know, privy to that data. Meaning, I asked for it, I got it. That wasn't the issue. But the issue was just realizing that wasn't the transparency of it. And you're absolutely right, because I've never understood why not. Because data is just a measurement of what we're all doing. Yeah, and that's what it should be. It's saying, okay, all of us together, this is what we're doing, and we need it quantified. You know, so we need it in this type of format because we need to work from it. But this is telling us, are we moving towards our goal? Are we moving towards our mission, or are we not? You know, so of course everybody needs to know. And I think sometimes data is held so close to somebody, and I've never understood why. I really haven't, because I've there's nothing like. Because in a way I do, because, you know, before schools, we weren't so collaborative, were we? Collaborating across schools and hubs and everything. It was very much competitive, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Whereas now I feel, thankfully, we are all collaborating. We've got hubs. So now I feel that the curtain on data is coming down, and it's showing that, you know, we're all in the same, you know, we're all in the boat, we all have the same purpose. But I still feel that saying we want to make data transparent is very different to actually making it available.
Yeah,
you know? And you need to have an idea of what you want out of it, the purpose of it. And especially when you're dealing with a school environment, I feel, and especially as teachers, because teachers, the school day creates a momentum. A child creates momentum, and children, you know, they're complex. So that momentum you need to not only maintain pace with, but you need to be ahead of, to do that. So even when you're giving data, you need to understand that it needs to be a collaboration, it needs to be a conversation, because there's going to be aspects of that data you need feedback from your teachers for, in order to make it, you know, a bit more comprehensive.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely, we need to just disseminate it properly and share it properly.
It's that ground up agenda, really, isn't it? Again, that whole thing. It's interesting. I'd like to touch on the point that you raised about real-time data, and you talked about a particular app. Now, recognizing the fact that other apps, and many of them now, are available, there's a lot of stuff out there that does mark work for teachers. And there's clearly a few tensions around that because teachers feel as if they might be losing sight on the marking and the process involved. Well, can I ask what the app that you were referring to before was, so that any listeners might want to try it, or other platforms are able to?
So the app that I was talking about was a mathematic one. So it's Magma Maths, and that one, I think a lot of schools will know it anyway. But that is the app that you can mark as it's going on. The app itself marks. So you don't have the pressure of a teacher to mark as well as evaluate. And that's the thing. So what this app is also doing is it's giving you the evaluation of your classroom, your context progress. So therefore, we know as teachers where in that lesson we want our students to be. This app helps us to see where the students are going. So it's actually student-led. Now, there are a lot of other apps that do this. And I think what we need to understand as teachers, okay, my fellow teachers out there, it is a case of they're foundational things that we can actually hand over to an app or to a device to do. It's the enhancement, it's the next level of that. So for example, in writing, so you've got the foundational targets that need to be there, the spelling for whichever your group you're in. So let the app do that. Let the app pick on that and see that that is being achieved. Then the teacher can go for that next level of target, so that next level, which tells us then that we are going to achieve whatever that expected standard is, for that student. Because remember, data is wholesome, okay? So it's even the emotional literacy involved in it. So which means that as teachers, we have one target and one purpose in a lesson of what we want to achieve. And then we have the flexibility to keep ourselves open because we're going to get data that's going to give us even the behavioral side and the cultural side. And then we have the flexibility to leave it to the children to see where the children are going with that. And if we can see that the apps are not replacing us, because that's something that's out there, right? It's not replacing us, just taking away that part of the role that I would say is admin, because it's quite foundational. I know us as teachers think the data and all is admin because we've got a lot of admin to do, but these are things that actually can be taken away from us, and we can do more of the next level, which takes us into facilitators.
I'm a big fan of what you've just said there. I love that idea, and I think the barrier to that perhaps is the fact that people like myself have been marking 20 economics papers every Tuesday night for the last 20 odd years or what have you, and that's a big paradigm shift to let go of that. But at the same time, throughout my entire teaching career, there's been the perennial debate around teacher workload, teacher admin, and the fact that if we could get rid of that, we could do more teaching. And I think that all of that ties into what you've just said. So I think that's huge. That idea of people being able to let that go, provided that they've still got sight on what the marking actually looks like. So we've gone through that real-time data, and I totally agree with you on that score as well, that the sooner you can get that feedback back to children, the better, because they move on faster than we do. And what they did last week is largely forgotten once you're into this week. So all of that idea of getting that data real time, if you can, is like absolute gold. And it allows you to steer the ship a little more nuanced, as it were. So we've got this situation. We're very keen, both you and I, and the schools that we work with are very keen for our teachers to be data literate. And in a world where it's an essential element of what we do now, how do we equip teachers with that data literacy that they need, particularly being mindful of how quickly things develop, grow, change, etc., etc. How do we actually do that in order to empower teachers rather than necessarily overwhelm them?
I think teachers would feel empowered when they realize that the data that they are either extracting, retrieving, or the data that's being given to them by a platform, right? I think they get empowered when they see it not as pressure, but they see it as a curiosity. So yeah, so they're seeing it as a form of I I have or I've extracted this data because I need to actually see where this lesson is going or where this topic is going. All right. So I need to have that in order where I am at the driving, at the driving seat. So I'm still driving the data, in other words. So teachers get empowered with that point, with the point of I am still in not so much control, but I am still aware that I'm part of this process. Okay, and I'm a driver of this process. However, there are parts of it that are flexible enough so that I can expand on the curiosity aspect of it. And then teachers don't see that as workload because they can see the impact, and that's what I think anybody that's in schools and in teaching and has been a teacher knows that that's what we want. We want to see that impact, and because we're all there for the children, we're there. It's just getting the same language and understanding that this data that I need is not just hard data. It is something that's a working document. So the minute a teacher knows that it's a working document and I can actually work with it and I can develop it and I can, it's malleable, this is something that I can do together. And then you have them, you'll have anybody on board because you're part of it, together with the students, you are co-creating this. So definitely, and I think that's what we want actually in schools, to have everybody together creating this.
I'm loving that idea. And I think back to the sort of high points of the best lessons that I've taught. And I think about the worst lessons that I've taught as well. And, the best ones are where you simply have a conversation with the students in your class and there's an exchange of ideas, intellectual rigor, and the students leave the room more informed than they were before, but perhaps there's nothing tangible down on paper or activity, or maybe you've not been throwing content at them for half of the lesson and that sort of thing. And that's where the real gold has happened to me, that sort of magic space between teacher and pupil. And I'm listening to all of these ideas that you're talking about, and I can see that magic space opening up if we're brave enough to let it.
Yeah, definitely. And you're saying that about the lessons that you've taught, and all us teachers will know this because and I've experienced it, where you have a lesson and you have an idea it's going to go one way and it doesn't, it goes another way, right? That happens. But the point being that even in those scenarios, when we talk about our curriculum and things like that, I think what we need to do now, especially looking at the paradigm shift, right, is to also think that we need to insert in the curriculum things like connection, trust. I think that needs to be built into the curriculum because that is the way forward. The way forward is through building connections and through building responsiveness. So I think when we look at our curriculum, we think, okay, we need to add particular things because we need to give our children future-ready skills because it's an uncertain future. So, so to be bogged down with particular frameworks that we can see that in a decade hasn't shifted us as much as we thought it would. So in other words, I'm waiting for somebody to go, all right, it hasn't worked. Let's reimagine, because it's not giving us what we need. So do we need another 5 years? Do we need another 10 years? Because AI is not going to let us have another 10 years. Things are going to change so quickly. So I'm thinking, so the sooner we start to rethink everything, but obviously do it in small, one thing at a time. But I think this thing, the minute you talk about data, and that's why I find your topic very, very engaging, very topical, is because the minute you try to reimagine or restructure or redefine data, you're starting a change that requires care, consistency, and a connection to actually be sustainable. Yeah, and
Yeah,
that's the
yeah, absolutely. Interestingly enough, if you touched on that sort of new paradigm in there as well, and we've sort of glossed over it a little bit so far. There is a new paradigm of learning coming, I suspect. My son is 7 and he's already well informed about things that neither me nor his teachers have taught him, because he's got access to knowledge through different channels, whether that's YouTube, Google, or what have you. We're clearly heading towards a paradigm of learning that doesn't require us to be delivering content at students in the way that maybe we have done since schools were invented. Essentially, we've always been the subject experts. In fact, we split our timetabling up in such a way that we teach by subject, which is an administrative convenience rather than a pedagogy consideration, perhaps. How do we move away from that really embedded culture of delivering content to that notion of facilitator that you touched on, and something a lot more loose, where we're able to engage with the students more, but perhaps deliver content to them a little bit or a lot less than maybe we have done?
That's a lovely question. Thing is that I feel that when we look at content, okay, sometimes we look at content as the end of, as our purpose. And I think what we need to look at is as a vehicle of sorts. Okay, so for one, I think that perception needs to change a little bit. And when we're looking at the paradigm shift that we are going into, you're absolutely right. It's not going to be so much based on recall and memory, because we're going to have particular AI, all right, and apps that are going to be able to do that. So the next level of where we're at is we're going to need to shift a different model, which is more to do with connection, problem solving, being able to have the capability to actually, for children, young learners have the capability to actually implement what they're learning in a meaningful way. So we're going to need to develop those things, right? And in order to do that, we need to understand that it needs to be a model that is very responsive. Yeah, so in a way, it's like a super intelligence. Okay, so our model, the paradigm shift that we're going into, is a self-learning model. And in order to do that, we need to change our concepts. And like you said as well, we've been doing things like teaching subjects or individual subjects for other reasons. We do have schools in other countries, Japan, Scandinavian countries, things, that are showing us how they have just evaluated their own needs, their own cultural needs, whatever, research, everything, and they've done it. They've just done it, and they're seeing what the impact is, and they're being very agile with it, and they're tweaking it and whatever, but they've got a different model completely.
Yeah.
And there's research out there that tells us that we should at least try it, at least, because there's enough research out there. So I think that needs to happen. I think the whole mental attitude needs to change, and we need to understand that as much as we're going into AI, it's going to give us that contrast that we will need to look at emotional literacy.
Yeah.
Because that is where our children, our young learners, are going to need help with. And that's where we, as facilitators, stroke previous instructional teachers, so we're moving away from instructional teachers into facilitators. And that's where we can help, because we are the guiding force. And we're just helping our students or our young learners access that potential and hope, for the future. And that's what we're doing. And we can only do it by being facilitators. We can't do it by holding on to what we're doing now.
There's a lovely, lovely book by a lady called Lucy Crean, Lucy Crean, and it's called Cleverlands, and it outlines those different education systems, and it talks about Finland, talks about China, Singapore, and these different places. And it's an amazing insight. She actually went and lived the experience in those places for her research rather than just sort of doing standard research. And she's an amazing person to hear speak as well, if you ever get the chance.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
The Lands by Lucy Crean, definitely worth a read. So as I'm listening to this, and we're sort of coming to the end of our time, the themes that I'm getting out of this are that really for data to work, we need to be looking at real-time data, stuff that feeds through in the immediacy if we're going to make it relevant to children. That perhaps there's a bottom-up approach that we could do with data rather than locking the data cabinet up and then asking tasks of teachers. We could give the data to teachers and maybe ask them to shape their own agenda as to what would be useful for them, and maybe give them the chance to explore that and the time to explore that, for sure. I love the idea of the safe space and that psychological safety. I mean, there's loads of stuff written about that. Professor Amy Edmondson is probably my favorite on that notion.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I love those ideas of purpose and curiosity that, and that can only really come from teachers themselves. It lacks a certain authenticity if it's bestowed upon you from above. So I'm loving all of those things, and some of the words that I heard coming out towards the end there are things that I hear very regularly when I visit schools, when I'm meeting with school boards, when I'm meeting with students. It's that idea of connection, problem solving, and those filtering skills, that ability to filter and manage your own sort of knowledge input, as it were. Hugely important stuff. So you've raised the things in there today that are massively important to me and that I value. So thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure.
That was great. Thanks, Fred.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.